Hey dudes, welcome to another episode of Rennch. On today's show, I've got a huge update on the EZ30R swap for the Grey Ghost. Stay tuned. Good to see you guys again. Welcome back to the channel. Behind me, 1969 Porsche 911. I've sold the 3.6 Porsche engine from it. I'm in the middle of swapping a Subaru EZ30R Flat 6 into its belly. Why would I do such a thing? Well, it's funny you should ask. 5 years ago, when I really committed to making videos for this channel, I bought a race car shell that had no engine or a transmission, and I decided, wouldn't it be cool if I did some sort of swap to help build the YouTube channel up? So, 2.5, 3 years of body work for the Blasphemy build, and I started working on the engine swap itself, doing all the engineering and that kind of thing. Well, somewhere along the way, multiple people said, hey, do you do a swap for air-cooled Porsches into these cars? And I didn't. And I had to explain, well, why would I do such a thing in the first place? So if you've missed this entire story, here's the Twitter version. So if you were to own a 912 or a 911 that had no engine or a very weak 90 horsepower engine like the 912 does, you may want a little bit more juice. So you might go out to eBay or something and buy yourself a Porsche 3.0 SC motor for maybe around $15,000. Now this motor is from probably 1979 through 1985 or 86, and it'll have 180 horsepower when brand new. It's not brand new. It's now almost 50 years old. So you may want to take it to get rebuilt. Here's the problem with all of that. The engine itself costs you 15 grand. The rebuild of the engine costs you 30. And in Southern California, they're making you wait a year or two to get your engine back. So now you've got $45,000 into a 180 horsepower engine. That's not great. The 3-liter Subaru EZ30R Flat 6 is 245 horsepower stock. It's 65 pounds lighter than the 911 engine. Has variable timing, variable valve lift, which is kind of like Honda's VTEC, all the modern accoutrement, if you will, on an engine that costs literally about as much as one cylinder costs on a 911 engine. So I decided to switch my focus from the Subaru twin-turbo EZ30R in the Blasphemy build and began to really start engineering an engine swap kit for all you guys. But engineering something like this, which is being made for essentially mass production, takes way longer than something that you'd fabricate in your own garage, because I have to think about all the different variables and all the different engine compartments and all the different cars from 1964 till 1989. And I have to custom manufacture a whole bunch of parts like custom radiators, and those things take way longer than I expected. Every little step is like 4 months. So it's taken a little while. I decided that I'm going to take the engine from the Blasphemy build, the one I've been working on for years, and stick it into my beloved 1969 Porsche 911 RSR. This car is very important to me. I've been working on it now for 21 years. When I was building it, my parents passed away, so I mixed their ashes into the primer. So I'm never selling it. It is my baby. I do have every expectation of putting a Porsche engine back in it, but I'm very far along in getting this Subaru swap done, and I thought I'd take you through that right now, show you where I am, and a couple things I need to do to get the thing done. All right, Ben, let's give him a tour. I know. Sorry that was so long-winded, but now you need to know what's going on. So here's the engine in the engine compartment. Kind of looking like it's supposed to be there, Flat 6. I've got the Porsche exhaust mounted. I just did these headers the other day. They look pretty good. And they're ready to rock. I've got a very temporary engine cradle happening as we are using Send Cut Send to design one, but I want to get this one in and functioning and make sure all of my points are where they need to be. One thing that's a little tricky is because of this big old chunk that hangs out on the back of the engine, I couldn't quite mount it quite as high as I would like. I would love it to be another inch or two up, but this is the sacrifice I had to make. One thing I'm a little concerned about is that the whole thing is going to be hanging too low. So I'm going to have to figure that out once I get the thing on its wheels and back down and see where we are. Engine compartment looks really good so far. I refurbed my little side panel here and repainted it, mounted the wideband and the flex fuel sensor. This will actually run E85, which will give me a little more room and compression. I can dork it up a little bit. This is obviously my custom Rennch overflow tank right here, which is super cool. I've not yet run my dash 16 fittings for the coolant, but everything else looks really good and pretty much ready to rock. Let me show you inside. I've got my Haltech 2500 ECU mounted under the seat where it would be factory style. It's all wired up. I've got it wired to my ignition switch here. I've got my drive-by wire already set up and good to go. And that was obviously all things that I did on the Blasphemy build. I've got my lovely BrightLink TV here. This is running the Haltech NSP ECU software, so I can see exactly what I've got here. I can pop over and check out my sensors, everything that's connected. I can look at, if I want to, I can see, all right, let's check out my setup, my I/O report, find out what every wire is supposed to be doing so I can backtrack and make sure that everything's wired the way it's supposed to be. I've got a punch list here of things that I have to do, and the two most pressing at the moment are I have no fuel pump sound happening, so I've got to make sure I can wire my fuel pump. Then the other thing is, I just kind of threw the engine in without doing the release bearing on the transmission. And I think what's happening is that it's not allowing the starter to engage the flywheel. It's just spinning and spinning and spinning. So I'm going to do that as well. It's a bit of a bummer. I'm going to have to pull the engine and maybe at least do a half pull where it's sitting on the jack and pull it out a little bit just so I can get the fork on that release bearing and get the thing in. That's probably going to be a pain in the bum. But once that's there and I can get the clutch adjusted and all as well, then I should theoretically be able to test fire the motor. Frankly, I can't wait to see what this sounds like with this sport exhaust. This is a basic Dansk factory sport exhaust, and I'm fingers crossed that we're gonna have this killer raspy Porsche sound and not the gurgly Subaru sound. But from what I've seen on the interwebs, I think we're gonna be good. I've got a couple things I need to check off the list that are somewhat easy. I'm gonna grab the sensor ground and ground it to the engine, and then I'm going to start mucking around with the fuel pump and make sure I can get the bad boy to turn on with the key. All right, ground to engine, done. I need to make sure my fuel pump is functional. So I'm actually gonna directly hook it up to a battery to make sure it makes noise. Then I'm gonna start testing the wiring of the Haltech to make sure when the ignition is on that the fuel pump is fired. I think it's supposed to be only fired for like 6 seconds to prime the system, and then when I turn the key. But right now I'm getting nothing. I don't hear any fuel pump whatsoever when I turn the key. So I've got a battery under the front end of the car. I'm just gonna run a wire to the positive and negative and just make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, it's good. All right, I've got my tester hooked up to the positive lead and it's good to go. The negative I've got grounded out here on my brake rotor. I hope that's okay. I'm gonna turn the key and see if anything pops up on that screen, in which case I will have 12 volt going to the wire. And if that's the case, then I think it's just the ground that I have to deal with. All right, let's turn the key and see if anything happens here. Literally zero power to the ECU. That's fun. Okay, so results of my experiment were successful. I turned the key, I got 12 volts to the signal wire, and I did find a random terminated ground wire. So I think I will run an extension to that, stick a plug on the end, plug it into the fuel pump, and see if that works. All right, fingers crossed we hear a few seconds of fuel pump priming. Come on, no whammies, no whammies. Nothing. Really? Poop! So, I've discovered a somewhat major problem. When I installed the clutch and the flywheel, I think in the last episode, one thing I didn't even notice is that there was no ring. on the flywheel. So my starter has nothing to latch onto. I've got nothing to actually turn the flywheel when I start the car. Now, why that one did not have one and this one does, I have no idea. So Mark and I are here, fingers crossed that it works and it will fit, and I can actually get it to turn the engine over. So now instead of just pulling the engine out a little bit so I can get the clutch fork on, got to fully pull the engine and get this new flywheel on, which then will be a lot easier to get the clutch fork on. Let me know we're at about 230 or so.
By the time it gets here, it goes back down to 140.
Okay, we're trying a bit of an experiment. Mark is here heating up the ring, and we're actually going to try a different pressure plate than the one I had in the car. That one is in the freezer, so we're going to heat this bad boy up. So it's, you know, at least 150, 200 degrees. Then the other one's in the freezer, and we should be able to get the ring to just settle, hopefully quite nicely onto the pressure plate. And then I will re-torque everything and stick it in and see if it works. Feel pretty good about it. Feeling pretty good. Is it that side?
Is that side, right?
Okay, okay. Oh, how funny. So, the laws of thermodynamics right here, you guys. Literally nothing has to be done. It's just going to cool down and it's going to be totally flush.
Right.
Don't even need to tap it. No tapping necessary. So it literally just fell right on. And if you guys ever need to do something like that, if you ever need to put a bearing in or something, you can always cool the bearings and heat the other part, and it'll expand, and then you can just drop the thing in and it should work and be good to go. But that in a few minutes when it cools down is going to be completely solid, like it's supposed to be. So bad news is that the clutch I have for the 915 is not going to fit this adapter plate. I think it's because this adapter is for a Porsche 1976 912 923 transmission. The depth seems like it's right, but the fitment of the actual clutch does not work, which unfortunately means I'm not going to make my deadline. Tomorrow's Thursday. The event is Saturday. I can reach out to Kennedy and see if they can get me a ring that we need. But even then, it would have to be in on Friday. They'd have to really rail it. So I'm thinking it might not happen, which is wah. So our friend AJ Mouli came by, or Moulis, I never get this right, came by that Friday to help me with some welding. I needed the radiators flipped, meaning the bottom port was facing the back of the 911, and I needed it to face the front of the 911. So he was nice enough to come by, jump on my Vulcan Pro TIG 205 welder, and did these fittings for me. I cannot emphasize enough how much of a bad arse he is at welding. He even welded a dash 16 bung on my thermostat fitting, which is really difficult to weld because A, it's cast aluminum, and B, it's so full of contamination. So we did a pretty good job cutting the original tip off, cleaning as much of the outer surface as we possibly could, and then he was able to heat the thing up ahead of time, kind of preheat it, and then welded a beautiful bead around the outside. If you guys need any welding, if you're in Southern California, first of all, need any sort of industrial welding, he will come to you. He's got this amazing, badass truck. But if you want any fabrication type welding like this, where you want to send him a radiator or something like that, anything he could do at his house, that is very, very doable. So make sure you hit him up. Here's his Instagram, and let him know that I sent you. And thank you once again to AJ. To finish up the clutch situation, the 915 transmission requires the outer ring that you previously had to be mounted on the actual pressure plate of the clutch. And since I didn't have that, since I sold it, I never actually had the ring to fit onto the clutch. So thank you once again to Pelican for bailing me out. I stopped by Pelican. They had the part I needed. I ran and grabbed it and then came back and was able to bolt it right together. So thank you to AJ and thank you to Pelican for helping me. Another task on my list was welding the engine cradle up. I had completely disassembled it so I could ship it. It was kind of a crazy thing because if I had left it the square engine cradle shape, shipping was going to be $450. Because I cut it into 4 long shapes, it was like $42 or something like that. So I cut it, I put some brackets on it. I just decided while the engine's out, let me just weld it back up again so I don't have to worry about anything. It's going to be fully welded. It's very ugly, but we will have a really cool laser cut bracket coming from Send Cut Send in the near future. Back in with the engine for, I think, the 4th time. It would come out one more time after this, but difficult to do on your own. Not the world's easiest task, but I was able to get it done. I'm becoming pretty good at it these days. We've been here before. I got fuel. Fuel's in the back of the car right now. Come on. I got fuel on the back. No, fuel's back. I've got the reluctors in. The reluctors in. Wait, why are you not relucting? Come on, what's your major malfunction? Ooh, that's a lot of fuel right there. Jeez, oh peas. All right, let me get rid of that fuel. It feels like that's dangerous. Like Russell Wilson. Oh no. Okay, it's the next day, and man, I've had such a hard time getting this thing to fire. Every time I would crank it, well, nothing would happen, basically. And sure enough, AJ to the rescue. His guy said, well, check your ignition, that when you're actually turning the key, that ignition voltage doesn't drop. And sure enough, it totally drops. So there's a pink ignition wire on the hull tech that requires, switched on. And I have it hooked up directly to the ignition switch. So what I need to do now is basically run a wire maybe to my fuse panel to a switched area and see if that works, which means that the ECU will actually be continuing to fire while I'm turning the car over. Because that's what's happening right now, is the ECU is shutting off while I'm turning the key and the injectors aren't firing. So I'm just basically doing nothing. I've hooked up a different 12-volt feed. I'm just firing the computer up now, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll turn the key, it'll help fire the injectors, and we'll make a sound from the engine. One thing I'm particularly excited about is I've never heard this with just a Porsche Sport exhaust. I've only heard it with the twin turbo setup I have in the Blasphemy build, so this will be hopefully what it sounds like as a regular car, and I'm very excited to hear what that sounds like. How about you guys? All right, here we go. Running, okay. All right, that's a good start. What's now? Made progress, but still not good yet. All right, a couple more changes. Gonna try again. Okay, we're back. The engine's back out again. I spent like an hour on the computer with Haltech today. Everything appears to be wired correctly. So this is still a mystery of why this is happening. I may do a couple of things while the engine is out. Like, for instance, this bracket, which only exists in 69, I may get rid of it. I might just, plug these things in and move them to the side, zip tie them up, because it's going to interfere with not only kind of the engine, but the air filter I'm going to use in here. So I can get rid of that stuff. And I'm just kind of double checking everything. I heard a weird clunky sound. So one of the things I'm going to do is this. I just want to see if I can recreate the sound with this mallet. And I don't hear it. I don't know what it was. I just didn't feel like maybe the transmission was okay, but it seems to be fine. So, still a mystery, still working on it. Fingers are crossed. So this is what could best be described as a very frustrated project update. Today marks 1 week since the engine was fully installed, fully wired, fully ready to go, and I still have yet to get the thing to fire up. I have attempted to fire it up 400 times. Since then, the engine has been out 4 times. I had the ring gear situation that I had to solve and a bunch of other stuff. I have changed the wiring on the fuel pump, the ignition switch, the ground switch. I have pulled the coil to check for spark. And by the way, if someone says, hey, grab the coil while somebody turns your engine over, don't do that. It will really shock the living crap out of you. I have checked for fuel in my fuel distribution block. I've checked for fuel on the fuel rails. I pulled them out last night and put cups under each one and turned the engine over. I've been on a call with Haltech where they took over the ECU and checked everything out. All the wiring looks great. I only have 2 things left that I haven't done. I haven't pulled apart my plug, which is like the main plug, to see if maybe a wire pulled out. I don't think so, the way we have it wired up, but you never know. And the only other difference between this car and the Blasphemy build is that I haven't installed the fuel regulator, because this one doesn't have a turbo. So I don't think that matters, but leave no stone unturned. I'm going to install the fuel regulator. It should only take a few minutes, and see what happens. All right, as predicted, that's the fuel reg. Fuel system goes from the fuel pump, comes through this filter, drops into my distribution block, which has 5 ports. One of them is blocked right now, but that's where a fuel pressure switch will go. 1 to each rail, and then there's a return that goes through the fuel pressure regulator and then through my flex fuel sensor, because I'm gonna be running E85 in this, and then back to the tank. Ground strap.